The first time I saw the silver Corvette in my handicap parking spot, I thought it was a mistake. An honest error. Maybe someone visiting the complex didn't notice the blue paint, the signage, or the bright white wheelchair symbol stenciled on the asphalt. I gave them the benefit of the doubt because that's who I am. After 22 years in the Marine Corps and an IED in Kandahar that left me with a titanium rod in my left femur and nerve damage that turns every step into a negotiation with pain, I've learned that most conflicts can be resolved with communication and patience. I was wrong about this one. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've lived in Riverside Meadows, a planned community in suburban Phoenix, for 3 years. It's one of those neighborhoods where every house looks vaguely similar, where the HOA rules dictate everything from mailbox color to the maximum height of your grass, and where Karens roam free like apex predators who've discovered their natural habitat. When I bought my townhouse here in 2021, I specifically chose a ground floor unit with designated handicap parking directly in front of my door. Spot number 42. It wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. The Corvette appeared on a Tuesday morning in late September. I just returned from my weekly physical therapy appointment, already exhausted, my legs screaming at me, and there it was. Gleaming silver with racing stripes, taking up my entire space. No handicap placard. No disability plates. Just entitlement on 4 wheels. I sat in my Honda Accord for a solid 5 minutes, parked awkwardly in the visitor area 50 yards away, trying to decide my next move. The September heat was already pushing 95 degrees, and the walk from visitor parking to my front door suddenly felt like a marathon. I made the walk. Every step a reminder of that day in Afghanistan. Every throb in my leg a pulse of frustration. By the time I reached my door, I was drenched in sweat and anger. But I took a breath, went inside, and did what reasonable people do. I called the HOA management office. The woman who answered sounded bored before I even finished explaining the situation. Her name was Patricia, and she had the tone of someone who'd heard every complaint imaginable and found them all equally tedious. She told me she'd send a notice to the vehicle owner and that it would be handled within 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days for someone to stop illegally parking in a handicap spot. The Corvette was there the next morning, and the morning after that, and every single morning for the next week. On day 8, I took photos. Clear shots of the license plate, the vehicle blocking the handicap signage, the absence of any legal permit. I documented the date and time. I called Patricia again. This time, her boredom had evolved into irritation, as if I were the problem for repeatedly reporting an ongoing violation. She assured me the issue was being addressed and that the board was aware. The board. That should have been my first warning. On day 12, I finally met the Corvette's owner. His name was Tyler Hartwick, and he looked exactly like you'd expect someone who drives a silver Corvette with racing stripes to look. Mid-20s, backward snapback cap, designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly disability check, and the kind of smirk that suggested he'd never faced a real consequence in his entire life. He was walking toward the car carrying a gym bag when I intercepted him. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone neutral and polite. "This is a designated handicap spot. I'm the resident it's assigned to. You've been parking here for almost 2 weeks." He looked at me like I'd asked him to explain quantum physics. "Yes, so? So, you can't park here. It's illegal. I need this spot because I have a disability." He glanced at my leg, and I saw the calculation happen in his eyes. The assessment. The judgment. "You walked over here fine, man. Look, I'm just staying with my mom for a few weeks. All the other spots are taken. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. Those 4 words lit something inside me that I'd kept carefully controlled for years. It is a big deal. It's the law, and it's my assigned spot. You need to move your car. Tyler's smirk widened. He tossed his gym bag into the Corvette's passenger seat with theatrical casualness. "Take it up with the HOA, dude. My mom's on the board." She said it's fine. His mom. On the board. And suddenly, Patricia's dismissiveness made perfect sense. "Your mom doesn't have the authority to override ADA regulations," I said, my voice harder now. "Move your car, or I'll have it towed." He laughed. Actually laughed. Then he climbed into his Corvette, revved the engine loud enough to wake the entire complex, and drove off with his middle finger extended out the window. But here's the thing that made my blood turn to ice. He came back 30 minutes later and parked in my spot again. That evening, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher was professional and sympathetic, but the responding officer explained what I'd already suspected. As private property, the HOA had primary jurisdiction. Unless the vehicle was blocking access or creating a safety hazard, the police would need the property management to request the tow. It was a civil issue, not criminal. He could document my complaint, but enforcement would come through the HOA. The HOA that was controlled by Tyler's mother. I filed a formal written complaint the next day. 2 pages, printed and delivered in person to the management office. Patricia accepted it with the enthusiasm of someone receiving a parking ticket. She assured me it would be forwarded to the board and addressed at their next meeting. That meeting was 3 weeks away. The harassment began on day 16. I woke to find dog feces smeared on my doormat. Not near it. On it. Carefully placed where I'd stepped the moment I opened my door. I have no dog. None of my immediate neighbors have dogs. But someone had made a special delivery. On day 19, my handicap parking sign was spray-painted black. The wheelchair symbol completely obscured. I reported it. Patricia said maintenance would get to it when they had time. That same afternoon, Tyler's Corvette was in my spot again, and this time there was a note under my windshield wiper where I'd parked in visitor parking. It read, "Stop crying to the HOA, cripple. Find somewhere else to park." Cripple. I stared at that word for a long time. I've been called worse by people who actually earned the right to insult me, people who stood next to me in combat zones and could joke about the worst parts of being human because we trusted each other with our lives. But this was different. This was malice without courage, cruelty without risk. I took the note inside. I photographed it. I added it to my growing file of documentation. And for the first time since moving to Riverside Meadows, I realized I wasn't dealing with a parking dispute. I was dealing with people who believed they were untouchable. On day 23, I finally met Tyler's mother. Her name was Diane Hartwick, and she was everything the term HOA Karen was invented to describe. 50-something, with an asymmetrical haircut that probably cost $300 to look deliberately unkempt. Designer athleisure where that had never seen actual athletics, and the kind of confidence that comes from wielding petty power over people who can't fight back. She knocked on my door at 7 in the evening, flanked by another board member whose name I didn't catch. "Mr. Webb," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in. "We need to discuss your continued harassment of my son." I blinked. "Excuse me. Tyler has told me you've been verbally aggressive with him, following him to his car, making threats. This behavior is unacceptable in our community, and if it continues, we'll have no choice but to take action against you." The audacity was stunning. "Your son has been illegally parking in my handicap spot for over 3 weeks. I have every right to." "That spot is community property," Diane interrupted, her voice sharp. "All parking spaces are technically shared resources. Your disability doesn't entitle you to exclusive use of any space. Tyler is a resident guest, and he has every right to park wherever spots are available." I felt my jaw tighten. That's not how handicap parking works. It's not how the law works. And you know it. She smiled. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before the killing blow. "The law is one thing, Mr. Webb. HOA bylaws are another. And in this community, the board interprets those bylaws. Now, I'm giving you a courtesy warning. Stop harassing my son, or we'll be forced to issue fines for hostile behavior and creating a disturbance. Are we clear?" They left before I could respond. I stood in my doorway, watching them walk away, and felt something shift inside me. That careful control I'd maintained, that patience I'd cultivated, that benefit of the doubt I'd extended. It evaporated. These people weren't making mistakes. They weren't confused about the rules. They were actively, deliberately choosing to make my life harder because they could, because they'd never been stopped before. I went inside, sat down at my computer, and began to research. HOA law in Arizona. ADA compliance requirements. Fair Housing Act violations. Disability discrimination statutes. I read for 4 hours straight, taking notes, bookmarking pages, building a foundation of knowledge. If they wanted to play games with rules and bylaws, then I'd learn every single rule in the book. The next morning, Tyler's Corvette was in my spot again. But this time, I didn't get angry. I got methodical. I ordered a wireless security camera system with night vision and motion detection. 2 cameras, weatherproof, with cloud storage. I had them installed within 48 hours, positioned to capture a perfect view of my parking spot and front door from 2 angles. Whatever happened next, I'd have evidence. I also sent a certified letter to the HOA board, citing specific sections of the Fair Housing Act, Arizona Disability Statutes, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. I requested an emergency meeting to address the ongoing violation and the retaliation I'd experienced. I kept copies of everything, digital and physical. I wasn't just covering my bases. I was building a case. The cameras proved their worth within 3 days. At 2:15 in the morning, motion detection woke my phone. I opened the app and watched in real time as a figure approached my front door. The night vision was crystal clear. Tyler Hartwick, wearing dark clothes and a hood, carrying something in his hand. He looked around, checking if anyone was watching, and then spray-painted a single word across my door: move. I had him. Clear footage, time-stamped, showing deliberate vandalism and harassment. I saved the video to 3 separate locations and sent a copy to the police that same morning. I filed a formal criminal complaint for vandalism and harassment. The responding officer this time was more engaged, especially when I showed him the footage and explained the pattern of behavior. He took a full report and said a detective would follow up. But here's where things got interesting. On day 31, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney, not the management company, an actual law firm. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized installation of surveillance equipment that violated community aesthetics guidelines. It also stated that I had violated the community's harassment policy by filing false reports against Tyler Hartwick, and that continued behavior would result in additional fines and potential legal action against me. They were trying to bury me in bureaucracy and legal threats. They were counting on me being too tired, too poor, too overwhelmed to fight back. They thought my disability made me weak, vulnerable, an easy target. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I spent that entire weekend doing something I should have done weeks ago. I pulled every public record I could find on Diane Hartwick and the HOA board. Tax records, meeting minutes, financial disclosures. Riverside Meadows had over 200 units, which meant the HOA collected substantial dues every month. Where was that money going? I requested copies of the last 3 years of financial statements, which as a homeowner I was legally entitled to review. I also filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA operations in the state, documenting every violation and act of retaliation. And then I did something that would change everything. I searched online for attorneys who specialized in disability discrimination and HOA disputes. I found exactly one in the Phoenix area who had successfully sued multiple HOAs for Fair Housing Act violations. Her name was Sarah Chun, and her website featured a list of 6-figure settlements she'd secured for clients. I called her office first thing Monday morning. Sarah's paralegal set up a consultation for that same afternoon. I brought every piece of documentation I'd compiled: photos, videos, letters, emails, notes from phone calls, the threatening letter from the HOA's attorney, everything. Sarah was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and precise, and she listened to my entire story without interrupting once. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and smiled. "Mr. Webb," she said, "this is one of the most clear-cut Fair Housing Act violations I've seen in 5 years. They've documented their own discrimination. They're retaliating against you for asserting your legal rights. And they're using HOA authority to do it, which opens them up to personal liability. Can we stop them?" I asked. "We can do better than stop them," Sarah replied. "We can make this so expensive and painful that they'll never think about doing this to anyone else again. But I need to know, are you prepared for this to get ugly? Because it will. They'll escalate. They'll try to make your life miserable. Can you handle that?" I thought about that IED in Kandahar, about the months of rehabilitation, about learning to walk again while my body screamed at me to give up, about every person who'd ever underestimated me because they saw the limp before they saw the person. "I'm still here," I said. "They can't do anything to me that's worse than what I've already survived." Sarah nodded. "Then let's go to war." Sarah Chun moved fast. Within 48 hours of our consultation, she'd filed a formal demand letter with the HOA board, the management company, and their attorney. The letter was a legal masterpiece, 12 pages of precisely cited federal and state law that methodically dismantled every argument Diane Hartwick had made. It demanded immediate cessation of all harassment, restoration of my parking rights, removal of all fines, a formal written apology, and compensation for damages. It also gave them 10 days to respond before we filed a federal lawsuit. The response came in 7 days, and it was exactly what Sarah predicted. Defiance wrapped in legal jargon. The HOA's attorney claimed that no violation had occurred, that I was misrepresenting the situation, and that the board had acted within its authority to maintain community standards. They rejected every demand and suggested that if I pursued litigation, they would counterclaim for frivolous legal action and seek to recover their attorney fees from me. Perfect, Sarah said when she read it to me over the phone. They just put everything in writing. They're denying your disability rights in a formal legal document. A federal judge is going to love this. But before we could file the lawsuit, something happened that I didn't expect. I started getting visitors. My neighbors. People I'd barely spoken to in 3 years of living at Riverside Meadows began knocking on my door, usually in the evening, always looking nervous. They'd heard about my situation through the neighborhood gossip network, and they had stories. The first was Jim Patterson from Building C. He told me about how the HOA had fined him $8,000 over 2 years for having the wrong shade of beige paint on his shutters. The approved color was desert sand, but his contractor had used Sahara tan, and according to Diane Hartwick, the difference was unacceptable. He'd eventually repainted just to stop the monthly fines from accumulating. Then came Maria Gonzalez from Building F. She was a single mother of 2 who'd been fined repeatedly for her children's toys being visible in her front yard. The HOA bylaws stated that no recreational equipment could be stored in areas visible from the street. Her kids' bikes, their basketball hoop, even sidewalk chalk, everything had generated fines. She'd been paying $50 a month in penalties for almost a year. The stories kept coming. An elderly couple who'd been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines for having their garbage cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. A young professional who'd been fined for parking his work truck, which the board deemed commercial, even though it was just a pickup with his company logo on the door. A veteran like me, Army not Marines, who'd been denied permission to install a ramp for his wheelchair and had been fighting the board for 8 months. Every single one of these cases had Diane Hartwick's fingerprints on them. She wasn't just the problem with my situation. She was a systemic problem that had been terrorizing this entire community, and nobody had been able to stop her because she controlled the board, controlled the management company, and controlled the flow of information. I told Sarah about the complaints, and she saw the same opportunity one did. We need to document all of this, she said. Get statements, written accounts, dates, amounts, everything. If we can show a pattern of discriminatory enforcement and abuse of authority, we can turn your individual case into something much bigger. I became a collector of stories. Every evening, I'd meet with neighbors, take notes, gather documentation. Most people were terrified to go on record because they feared retaliation, but enough were angry enough to participate. We compiled a file with 17 separate complaints spanning 3 years. It was a portrait of petty tyranny, and it was all going to become part of our case. Meanwhile, Tyler's harassment was getting bolder. He'd started parking in my spot every single day, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for hours, always with that same smirk when I saw him. My security cameras caught him keying my car on October 15th. Just a casual drag of something metal along the driver's side door as he walked past, barely breaking stride. I filed another police report. The detective assigned to my case, a patient man named Detective Morrison, was building a file, but he explained that criminal charges for harassment require a pattern that meets specific legal thresholds. We were getting there, but we needed more. That's when I decided to get creative. Sarah had advised me to document everything, so I started documenting Tyler's movements. Not stalking, nothing illegal, just observation from my own property. I noticed he kept a very predictable schedule. Gym every morning at 9. Back by 11. Out again around 3 for what I assumed was his job, though I suspected from his lifestyle that Tyler and job were loosely acquainted concepts. Home by 7. Out again around 10 for what appeared to be bar hopping. I also noticed something else. The Corvette was always pristine. Freshly washed, perfectly maintained, clearly his pride and joy. He spent more time cleaning that car than most people spend with their families. And an idea started forming. Not revenge exactly. More like consequences. On October 20th, I received notice that the HOA was holding an emergency meeting to discuss my ongoing behavioral issues, and that my presence was mandatory. The meeting was scheduled for October 27th at 7 in the evening in the community clubhouse. Attendance required, or I'd face additional fines. Sarah told me not to worry. She'd be there with me. But I wanted to give them something to really discuss at that meeting. Something memorable. I spent the next week preparing. I contacted the Arizona Department of Real Estate and learned that they'd opened an investigation into Riverside Meadows HOA based on my complaint and the additional documentation I provided. The investigator, a stern woman named Linda Crowley, told me they'd found several concerning irregularities in the financial records and were expanding their inquiry. She couldn't share details, but she suggested that I might want to request a full forensic audit of HOA funds at the upcoming meeting. I also contacted a professional surveyor. I'd been thinking about something Diane had said during her visit to my door, about how parking spaces were community property and shared resources. But when I'd purchased my townhouse, the deed specifically included designated parking spot 42 as part of my property, not communal, mine. I paid the surveyor to confirm the exact legal boundaries of my property as recorded in the county records. The survey results were enlightening. Parking spot 42 was indeed part of my deeded property. It wasn't HOA common area at all, which meant every single day that Tyler parked there, he wasn't just violating disability law. He was trespassing on my private property. And Diane's claims about community property weren't just wrong. They were fraudulent. Armed with this information, Sarah amended our demand letter and prepared to file the federal lawsuit on October 26th, one day before the HOA meeting. The timing was deliberate. We wanted them off balance. We wanted them scared. But Tyler gave us an even better gift. On the night of October 23rd, my security cameras caught him doing something spectacular. At 11:47 p.m., clearly drunk from his stumbling gait and the way he fumbled with his keys, Tyler returned home and parked his Corvette in my spot as usual. But then, instead of going inside, he walked over to my car, pulled out his keys, and carved the word cripple across my hood. Deep scratches, long and deliberate, all captured in perfect high-definition video with his face clearly visible. I watched it happen in real time on my phone. My first instinct was to run outside and confront him. My second instinct was smarter. I saved the video to multiple locations and sent it to Detective Morrison with a message. Got him. Clear footage. Felony criminal damage. Detective Morrison called me at 7 the next morning. Mr. Webb, that video is more than enough. I'm getting a warrant for his arrest today. Criminal damage, harassment, possible hate crime enhancement given the disability slur. He's looking at actual charges now. How long until he's arrested? I asked. Probably 48 hours. We'll pick him up this weekend. Perfect. That would be right before the HOA meeting. The timing couldn't be better. But I still wanted to do something that would make a statement. Something visible. Something that would show Tyler and his mother that actions have consequences. I thought about it for a full day, turning the idea over in my mind, making sure it was legal, making sure it was justified, making sure it was absolutely worth it. On October 25th, 2 days before the HOA meeting, I took action. I contacted a towing company that specialized in private property enforcement. I provided them with copies of my property deed, the survey showing that parking spot 42 was my private property, photographs of Tyler's vehicle habitually trespassing, and a notarized statement authorizing them to remove any unauthorized vehicle from my property. Everything legal, everything documented, everything by the book. The tow truck arrived at 6 in the morning on October 26th. Tyler's Corvette was sitting in my spot, as it had been every day for over a month. The driver hooked it up and hauled it away within 10 minutes. Professional, efficient, and completely legal. But here's where I added my own creative touch. Before calling the tow company, I'd also called a friend from my Marine Corps days who now ran an auto shop. I explained the situation, and he had an idea that was both hilarious and perfectly legal. When the Corvette arrived at the impound lot, my friend's shop was there to document its condition as is standard practice for impounded vehicles. While documenting, they performed what's called a storage safety check, which involves removing the wheels to check for brake safety violations on vehicles that have been driven aggressively or recklessly. The wheels were removed, documented as part of the safety inspection, and stored separately from the vehicle per standard impound protocol. Completely legal. Completely by the book. But it meant that when Tyler finally located his car at the impound lot, his precious Corvette would be sitting on blocks with all four wheels removed. My phone started ringing at 8:30 in the morning. Diane Hartwick, absolutely screaming. "What did you do? Where is Tyler's car? If you don't tell me right now, I'll have you arrested." I kept my voice calm and pleasant. If Tyler's vehicle was removed from my private property, that would be because it was trespassing. He can contact the impound lot to retrieve it. I believe the fees are around $400 for the tow, plus $50 per day storage, plus any inspection fees. He should probably call them soon. Those daily fees add up quickly. She hung up on me. 5 minutes later, the HOA's attorney called. Sarah took that call and explained very slowly and clearly that I had exercised my legal property rights to remove an unauthorized vehicle from my deeded parking space, that everything had been done according to Arizona statute, and that if they had any concerns, they could address them at tomorrow evening's meeting. Or, she added helpfully, in federal court when we filed our lawsuit later today. The lawsuit was filed at 2 in the afternoon on October 26th. United States District Court, District of Arizona. Marcus Webb versus Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, Diane Hartwick individually, Patricia Stevens individually, and Tyler Hartwick individually. Claims included Fair Housing Act violations, Americans with Disabilities Act violations, intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment, and civil conspiracy. We were seeking compensatory damages, punitive damages, attorney fees, and injunctive relief. The filing made local news by 5 p.m. Disabled veteran sues HOA over parking discrimination, ran on 3 Phoenix news stations. Tyler was arrested at 7:15 that evening at his mother's townhouse. Detective Morrison personally made the arrest, and he told me later that Tyler cried during booking. The charges were felony criminal damage, aggravated harassment, and a hate crime enhancement. His mugshot made the local news website by 9 p.m., right next to the story about the lawsuit. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. the next evening, October 27th. I arrived at 6:30 with Sarah. We were early, but the community clubhouse was already packed. Every seat filled. Standing room only. People had turned out in numbers I'd never seen at an HOA meeting before. Word had spread about the lawsuit, about Tyler's arrest, about everything. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This had become a referendum on Diane Hartwick's reign of terror. Diane was already there, sitting at the board table with 3 other board members who all looked like they wished they were anywhere else. Her face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Tyler was notably absent, probably on bail and hiding somewhere. The HOA's attorney, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Gerald Brat, sat next to Diane with a stack of papers and the expression of someone who knew his clients were doomed. The meeting started 15 minutes late because they couldn't get the room quiet. Finally, Diane banged her gavel and called for order. She started reading from a prepared statement about how certain residents had been spreading false information and taking inappropriate legal action that threatened the community's financial stability. She got about 90 seconds into her speech before Sarah stood up. "Point of order, Madam Chair. Before this board discusses any alleged inappropriate behavior, I'd like to submit several documents for the record. First, a copy of the federal lawsuit filed yesterday. Second, a copy of the arrest warrant executed against your son Tyler Hartwick for multiple felonies related to his harassment of my client. And third, a formal request for a complete forensic audit of this HOA's financial records for the past 5 years, as is my client's right under Arizona statute." The room erupted. People shouting questions, demanding answers, calling for Diane's resignation. The other board members looked panicked. Gerald Pratt was frantically whispering to Diane, who had gone pale. She tried to regain control, but the gavel was useless against the rising tide of anger from residents who'd been abused by this board for years. That's when Linda Crowley from the Arizona Department of Real Estate stood up. I'd invited her, and she'd accepted. "Mr. Pratt, Mrs. Hartwick, I'm Linda Crowley with the State Real Estate Department. I'm here to inform you that based on our ongoing investigation, we're formally suspending this HOA board's authority pending a complete audit. We've found evidence of financial irregularities, improper fine assessments, and potential embezzlement of community funds. As of this moment, this board is under state oversight." The room went completely silent for about 3 seconds. Then it exploded again, but this time with cheers. People were standing, applauding, some crying. Diane looked like she'd been slapped. She tried to argue, but Linda simply handed her an official notice and walked out. The meeting devolved from there. Residents started openly sharing their own horror stories about the board's abuse. One after another, people stood and recounted years of harassment, excessive fines, and discriminatory enforcement. The other board members started distancing themselves from Diane, claiming they'd been pressured or misled, trying to save themselves. Gerald Pratt quietly packed his briefcase and left without a word. Diane tried to adjourn the meeting, but someone called for an emergency vote to remove her from the board. The vote was taken by show of hands. Out of approximately 80 residents present, 76 voted to remove her. 3 abstained. One person voted against the measure, and I'm pretty sure it was Diane herself. She left the clubhouse without another word, her face bright red, her hands shaking. I watched her go and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Not joy exactly. Justice. The aftermath unfolded over the next 3 months like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. The state audit revealed that Diane had embezzled over $47,000 from HOA funds over 3 years, funneling money through fake vendor contracts and inflated maintenance bills. She was criminally charged with theft, fraud, and abuse of fiduciary duty. Tyler took a plea deal on his charges, agreeing to 2 years probation, community service, restitution for the damage to my car, and mandatory anger management classes. His Corvette, by the way, accumulated over $2,000 in impound fees before he could retrieve it, which his mother had to pay since his own accounts were frozen as part of the criminal investigation. The HOA settled our lawsuit for $95,000, plus full reimbursement of attorney fees, and a permanent injunction protecting my parking rights and prohibiting any retaliation. Sarah negotiated that every penny of the settlement would come from the HOA's liability insurance, not resident dues, so I didn't have to feel guilty about my neighbors paying for the board's misconduct. Patricia Stevens, the management company representative who dismissed my complaints for weeks, was fired. The management company itself was replaced after residents voted to terminate their contract. A new board was elected, and their first action was to review and revise every bylaw that had been used to abuse residents. 17 separate rules were eliminated or reformed. 6 other residents who'd been victimized by Diane's enforcement launched their own legal actions seeking reimbursement of improper fines. All of them settled within 4 months. The total cost to the HOA's insurance company exceeded $300,000. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks after the meeting. I was outside my townhouse, my car parked legally in my spot number 42, with fresh paint covering where Tyler had scratched it. A moving truck pulled up to Diane's unit. I watched as movers carried out her furniture, her belongings, her entire life in Riverside Meadows packed into boxes. She was moving, forced out not by law, but by the same community pressure she'd used to terrorize others for years. Nobody would talk to her. Nobody would acknowledge her. She'd become invisible. She saw me watching as she supervised the movers. Our eyes met across the parking lot. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, leaning against my car in my handicapped spot, and let her see that I was still here. Still standing. Still winning. She looked away first. Tyler's Corvette never returned to Riverside Meadows. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that he'd moved back to California to live with his father. Apparently, having a criminal record and being known as the guy who harassed a disabled veteran wasn't great for his social life in Phoenix. Imagine that. As for me, I still live in my townhouse. I still park in spot 42 every single day. And I've become something of a neighborhood advocate. When new residents move in, sometimes they come to me with HOA questions or concerns, and I help them navigate the system. I've learned that most conflicts can still be resolved with communication and patience, but some conflicts require you to stand your ground and fight back with everything you have. The security cameras are still up. I kept them, and several other residents installed their own after seeing how useful mine had been. We've created an informal network, a neighborhood watch focused not on external threats, but on holding our own leadership accountable. The new board knows we're watching, and they govern accordingly. Sarah Chen still sends me Christmas cards. She used my case as the foundation for a seminar she now teaches on disability rights and HOA law. I've been invited to speak at it twice, sharing my story with other attorneys who represent victims of HOA abuse. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that IED in Kandahar, about how it changed my life, limited my mobility, gave me chronic pain that I'll manage for the rest of my days. For years, I saw it only as loss. But fighting this battle taught me something different. That disability doesn't mean weakness. That limitations don't mean helplessness. That the same determination that got me through rehabilitation could get me through anything else life threw at me. Diane Hartwick and her spoiled son thought they could push around a disabled veteran because they assumed disability made me an easy target. They learned the hard way that some targets shoot back. And when they do, they hit exactly what they're aiming for. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a disabled Marine Corps veteran. I live in Riverside Meadows, Arizona, and I park in handicap spot number 42, which is exactly where I belong. If you're dealing with HOA harassment, disability discrimination, or any situation where someone in authority is abusing their power, document everything. Find your allies. Know your rights. And never, ever assume that someone will stop just because you ask nicely. Some people only understand one language, and that language is consequences. Make sure you're fluent.